Jacqueline Frank next from Montreal.
Thank you, Bob. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here this week celebrating the great gathering, the A4s. Thank you all for joining this conversation. I would just like to introduce Mary Claude Reed, who is the Executive Director of Expo Rail, is with us today. Mary Claude has been the Executive Director for 20 years. And I know many of you are railway enthusiasts, so you know that trying to manage railway enthusiasts is like trying to herd cats. We all have our reasons for becoming interested in railways. Here is mine. This is the view from my boyhood bedroom window in the 1950s, overlooking the Canadian Pacific Railway's main line, with 98 passenger trains passing by every day. With a neighbor like this, who could resist becoming a railway enthusiast? I am the president of the not-for-profit Canadian Railroad Historical Association in Montreal, Canada. Founded in 1932, the association is the oldest and largest railway enthusiast organization in Canada and the second largest in North America. The association's members carry out research on Canada's railway history, and for the last 76 years, it has published the results of this research in a bi-monthly magazine called Canadian Rail. Here are a few copies which we're putting out, along with some brochures about the Expo Rail. In 1950, the association began acquiring rolling stock when the Montreal Tramways Company donated an early Montreal tram. The 1950s was one of the most extensive periods of technological change in North American tram and railway operations. As a result, the association was faced with a choice: expand the rolling stock collection or let them be scrapped. Wisely, we decided to continue building a collection and to create a railway museum. Today, this collection has over 160 pieces of rolling stock. In 1961, the association acquired land and started building what today is known as Expo Rail, the Canadian Railway Museum. Expo Rail sits on 55 acres of land with 160,000 square feet of covered display and reserve area, 2 stations, a workshop, a 1-mile tramway loop, a 2-mile railway, a miniature garden railway, as well as an extensive library and archives. Although we have railway and tram operations, Expo Rail is a museum and not a preserved railway. So, how did the Dominion of Canada ever come to Canada? By serendipity. Let me explain. In the embryonic stages of our collection, we decided to add an international component so visitors could see other types of railways and see how they evolved from a common ancestor, the Penny Darren locomotive of 1804. In 1961, we wrote to the chairman of the British Transport Commission requesting a donation of an early steam locomotive, and they agreed to donate a London-Brighton South Coast Railway Stradley Terrier Wadden, built in 1875. The locomotive was restored cosmetically at Eastleigh into Stradley's improved engine green livery at a cost to us of £500 and arrived in Montreal on September the 6th, 1963. Quoting from Canadian Rail at the time, Wadden's arrival would afford an interesting comparison with the North American style locomotives, illustrate graphically the different evolutionary lines along which the railway engines of Great Britain have developed, and afford a link between our museum and the land where the steam locomotive was born. Next, in 1964, we secured a commitment from the SNCF to donate an 060 Bourbonnais tender locomotive built in 1883. The SNCF locomotive arrived at Expo Rail on May the 11th, 1965. Wadden and the French engine are the 2 oldest locomotives in our collection. We had no sooner received the French engine than we heard that Dominion of Canada was, quote, withdrawn to be sold for scrap by British Railways. The then president of the association, Dr. Robert Nichols, wrote to the British Railways Board asking if they would donate the locomotive to the association, given its connection to Canada and the fact that Canada would celebrate its centennial in 1967. You'll recall that when it was recommissioned as Dominion of Canada to join the coronation service in 1937, Canada's coat of arms had been added to each side of the cab, and the Canadian Pacific Railway had given it a bell and whistle typical of Canadian engines. The recommissioning was conducted by the then Canadian High Commissioner Vincent Massey, who later became Governor General of Canada, a ceremony which we recreated yesterday here. The British Railways Board agreed to donate the engine to us, provided we pay to restore the locomotive to exhibition standards and see to the transfer to Canada. Tate & Lyle and many other smaller British companies who did business in Canada contributed to the cost of restoration, but was deemed too expensive to return the engine to its pre-war condition. So it went to Crewe to be painted in the British Railways green livery that it retained until last October. Dominion of Canada was shipped from London to Montreal, arriving on April the 24th, 1967. The Port of London Authority, CP Ships, and the Montreal Harbours Board agreed to move the locomotive free of charge. The Canadian Pacific Railway moved it on its wheels to Expo Rail, also free of charge. Now here is some very rare footage. This is showing the Dominion of Canada being moved from the harbour of Montreal to Expo Rail on a mainline North American railway. It's the only time the engine has ever been on mainline rails in North America. When we shipped it back, it was shipped on a flat car. The film was taken by the present Chief Mechanical Officer of the Canadian National Railways. Why do we want Dominion of Canada for our collection? Besides the obvious reason of being named for our country and being our centennial year, it is the only three-cylinder steam locomotive in our collection. Canadian Pacific Railway built one three-cylinder steam locomotive in 1931 using the Gresley conjugated valve gear, which Dominion of Canada has, and this permits us to display an example of this particular valve arrangement. It has a water scoop, a corridor tender, features unheard of on a Canadian locomotive. It is an absolutely classic example of a 1930s streamlined steam locomotive, and it was about to be scrapped, and we just could not let that happen. Dominion of Canada has been displayed undercover ever since reaching Expo Rail, and over the last 48 years has lived a pretty quiet life, being taken outside only on special occasions or for shunting, as we do with other pieces of rolling stock. Unfortunately, the building where it resided does not have proper climate control, resulting over time in paint deterioration. And I should say here, it did not help that we dented the front of the locomotive when shunting it without a buffer car. We have now built a car with buffers on one end, and only this will be used in the future. In addition, we only recently discovered that when Dominion of Canada was restored at Crewe in 1967, only one coat of primer and one coat of color was applied, instead of the usual 5 or 6 coats, which most certainly gave little protection in Canada's harsh climate. At the time, British Railways charged us £1,600 for the work, quite a substantial amount in 1967. A little technical problem here. We have another video. I'm going to go all over the place. It worked so well before. I have to say. What this is a picture of the Dominion of Canada moving at the Railway Museum, and it's being pushed by a replica of an 1849 steam locomotive that was built in Scotland. It's quite amazing the strength of the small locomotive to be able to push such a large and heavy locomotive. We used it when we were shipping it away, so we thought it was the right kind of engine to move it out when we were shipping over here. We were delighted when Steve Davies asked that we participate in this great gathering, especially so when we heard Dominion of Canada will be fully restored to its garter blue livery. In recent years, we have begun planning to restore Dominion of Canada to its British Railways green, but luckily had not advanced this project. How much more magnificent she looks in her 1938 condition. We were pleased to prepare the locomotive for shipment to Shildon and to work with Andrew Goodman and his very experienced team to load it onto heavy-duty flat cars for the 800-mile trip to Halifax. From Halifax, it was taken by ship to Liverpool, and then on Andrew's trucks to Shildon. When Dominion of Canada returns to Expo Rail, it will be placed in the prime location inside the Angus Pavilion. That's our version of the Great Hall. Beside iconic Canadian Pacific Railway, Stanley Streamline Royal Hudson 2850, built in 1938, this locomotive pulled the Royal Train with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother aboard, across Canada on their 1939 tour. This display is probably unique in the world of railway museums, viewing the two locomotives from floor level, but also from above, and walking underneath the locomotives to look at them from below. The restoration by the team at Shildon has been nothing short of spectacular. Take a look at these three photos taken over 48 years. The pictures say it all. Looking back, I believe it was serendipity that brought Dominion of Canada to Expo Rail and then back over here. By chance, it was to be scrapped. By coincidence, we were building an international component to our collection at the time. By perseverance, Dr. Nichols managed to persuade British Railways to give it to us, and several companies to foot the bill for repainting and transportation. By genius and